Welcome to your Bible guide. We are going to be looking at Exodus chapter 2 today. And just quick review to catch us up to speed. Exodus chapter 1 begins picking up the story of the nation of Israel. Now, this is just after the events of Genesis, where Joseph and his brothers come with him to the land of Egypt. There had been a big famine, and through an amazing series of events, Joseph being sold into slavery by his brothers, and they end up in Egypt, and Joseph saves his family, and so their family is now in Egypt, and they're sheep herding and just living there, really living a pretty good life and stuff. But the king after Joseph, the Pharaoh is what Exodus refers to him, is not remembering Joseph's family, or choosing not to remember. We're not sure exactly how that comes about, but he's not really remembering how Joseph and the Israelites really saved the Egyptians' lives through storing away 7 years of grain for the famine. Okay, and so the family forgets, or the king forgets Joseph's family, and the Israelites though are really flourishing, having lots of kids, multiplying over the land, and the king gets really worried about this. The Pharaoh's looking around, being like, "Oh man, there's all these Israelites now." And I'm a bit concerned. What if they, join with one of the militaries of another nation, and they come after me and take over our land? And so what they decide to do is they say, hey, we're going to put all the Israelites under slavery. The Israelites were living in the part of Goshen, which is just a section of Israel, or of Egypt. And so he says, hey, we're going to oppress them. We're going to push them to hard slavery. And it was just a really bad deal for the Israelites. Not only that, but the king, the Pharaoh, makes this decision. He says, I want all of the babies, the baby boys, to be killed. And so obviously if the boys are killed, they can't raise up to be military age, and also it's going to slow down the birthing rates without having as many males in the population. Fortunately, the midwives, the ones helping deliver, they were instructed to kill the babies, and they feared God more than they feared the Pharaoh, and so they let the babies live. And then at the very end of chapter 1, we see that the Pharaoh says to all of the people of Egypt, hey, if you see an Israelite infant, you have the right to kill them, throw them in the Nile River and drown them. And so it's a horrible, horrible situation for the Israelites, and we're going to continue to pick up this story now in chapter 2. So here's what it says. It says, now a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. So remember, there was the 12 tribes of Israel. Levi was one of the sons that made up the 12 tribes. And so we get this story that it's a Levite. Okay, this will be important later on, because the Levites later become one of the priestly families in the line of Israel. Okay, this hasn't happened yet, but will happen through the story of Moses. So a man from the house of Levi went and took as his wife a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. And so they see the baby, they see kind of something unique about the baby, that they saw something there, and so verse 3, it says, when she could hide him no longer, right? So hide him for 3 months. When he can hide him no longer, she took for him a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And so she kind of makes this little mini boat in a way. And so the bitumen and pitch make it kind of somewhat watertight. And so this baby gets put because she's worried that the Egyptians are going to find the baby and they're going to drown it or kill it, in some form. And so she sees and says, okay, I can't hide this baby anymore. And so she makes a little baby boat and puts him in it. And it says she puts him among the reeds by the riverbank. Okay, verse 4, and it says, and his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. Right? So put sister on the sideline, you're watching from the bushes. Hey, let's see what happens to the baby. Verse 5, it says, now the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. While her young women walked beside the river, she saw the basket among the reeds and sent her servant woman, and she took it. Right? So she's going down, she's bathing, and she notices the little baby boat, and like, okay, let's see what this is about. And so she gets the baby boat. Verse 6, it says, when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby was crying. So she took pity on him and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. So she understands that when she sees the baby crying, she feels sorry for the baby, right? It says takes pity on it. And she recognizes, acknowledges through, skin tone, facial recognition, that kind of stuff, that you can tell, like, wait a second, this is not an Egyptian baby. This is actually one of the Hebrew babies. Okay, and so we're going to read in the Old Testament, there's a lot of terms that kind of mean the same thing. So you got Israelite, you got Hebrew. Okay, those kind of mean the similar terms to help us understand. Okay, this is from the family of Abraham. Okay, one of Abraham's kids. Eventually, kind of, Jacob gets the name Israel in that line, and so we get Israelites. But also Hebrews was another term for that, kind of somewhat interchangeable. There might be some more to it, but we're not going to get into that now. So verse 8, it says, and Pharaoh's daughter, verse 7, it says, then his sister, who was, watching from the sidelines, sister pops up and says to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? Verse 8, it says, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. So the girl went and called the child's mother, right? And so she's watching from the sidelines, and just kind of makes a comment like, oh, hey, should we get one of the ladies to nurse the baby, because the baby's crying. Baby was hungry, obviously. And so they go and get the mom, which worked out really great for this plan. And so end of verse 8 says, the girl went and called the child's mother. Verse 9, and the Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages. So not only... and remember, God has not really been mentioned in this part of the story yet, but we can see this has been a theme in the book of Exodus so far. Is God, His hand is in here though, right? We can see the events coming together of God's sovereign plan that's saying, hey, God is working out the things He wants to work out, and so we see this baby saved. Not only is the baby saved and picked up by what the Pharaoh, the king's daughter, they get mom, like the actual mother of the baby, and she says, I'm actually even going to pay you, right? And so she's just nursing the baby like she would, but not only is she nursing the baby, she's getting paid to nurse her very own child. So this is God's hand. You can just kind of see God's fingerprints, his handiwork mixing out throughout this story. So the woman took the child and nursed him. Verse 10, it says, when the child grew older, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. Okay, so what is happening here is Pharaoh's daughter is adopting this child. Okay, we're going to get the name in just a second. But Pharaoh's daughter actually adopts this child into the royal family. This is pretty unique. This is significant. I don't know how rare this was, but I would imagine it's pretty rare that an Egyptian, Pharaoh's daughter, Egyptian royalty, would take a baby from another race, another ethnicity, and adopt them. Okay, and so this you can just kind of see God's movement through here, God's handiwork of Him arranging certain things. Okay, so the child grows older, brought back to Pharaoh's daughter, being her son. She named him Moses. Okay, because she said, I drew him out of the water. Okay, so this is a pretty amazing thing. And you can see, I always like having up on the left side, you see just the ESV in here. On the right side, there's the Faith Life Study Bible, and just kind of a note on Moses, where you can kind of see it here. It says the name Moses is Egyptian in origin, although the name seems to derive from the Egyptian verb MSY, translated to give birth. That verb does not reflect the interpretation given here. I drew him out of the water, which is draw out, Mashah. Okay, and so we kind of get this idea that that God is working in this child Moses. Now, so remember, the book of Exodus is attributed to Moses, right? So in some ways, Moses is writing his own biography here of like, hey, here's what happened in my life. Okay, and so she draws him out of the water, recognizes him as one of the Hebrews, gets his own mom to nurse him, pays the mom, and then brings him into the royal family, and gives him his name, right? So he gets an Egyptian name. Okay, so verse 11. Okay, and so there's a little bit of a gap in time here. It says, one day when Moses had grown up, right? So baby Moses from the water, now Moses has grown up. It says he went out to his people and looked on their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his people. Okay, so there's a couple things going in here. So Moses has gotten older. He's grown up in the palace as royalty, but he must acknowledge and recognize that, wait a second, I'm actually one of the Hebrews, right? Because it says at the end, one of his people. So he's recognizing some of these things, and he's watching the burdens of slavery on his people. Right, so he's watching this all happen, and one day he kind of sees this happen where an Egyptian is physically beating one of the Hebrews. Verse 12, it says, he looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptian and hit him in the sand. So Moses watches this happen. Something flares up into him, some kind of anger of some sort, and so he actually goes and he kills the Egyptian who was beating the Hebrew, and it says he hides him in the sand. Verse 13, it says, when he went out the next day, behold, two Hebrews were struggling together. So now it's a couple of the Hebrews, the Israelites, were arguing together against each other. And he said to the man in the wrong, why do you strike your companion? Okay, so obviously it was a pretty physical fight here, which involved striking. He answered, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? Right, and so there's obviously this awareness of what Moses had done. Right? We see here then the verse says, then Moses was afraid and thought, surely the thing is known. Right? Like, oh no, everyone knows. Everyone knows that I killed someone and hit him in the sand. And so verse 15, the story carries on. It says, when Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. Okay, now remember, Moses grew up in the Pharaoh's household. Right, like the Pharaoh was kind of his grandpa in a way, right? And so Pharaoh hears it, and Pharaoh gets mad and he wants to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and stayed in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Right, so we don't know all the events that happen here. We just know that Pharaoh gets mad. He goes after Moses. Moses runs away to this land of Midian here, and we just see that now he's sitting down by a well. Verse 16, it says, now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. So he's in this area. He's in Midian, and we see in the Faith Life Study Bible notes, it says Midian was kind of northwest Arabia, okay, east of the Gulf of Aqaba. Okay, so that's kind of where it is. And so he's sitting down at the well. Some of the daughters come up, and they're getting water for their flocks. And at verse 17, it says, the shepherds came and drove them away. Right, so the daughters come, but then there's some other shepherds near the well, and they kind of try to get the daughters away. But it says Moses stood up and saved them and watered their flock. Right, so Moses sees what's going on. He kind of goes out to those who are being oppressed here, and he saves the daughters. Verse 18, it says, when they came home to their father Reuel, he said, how is it that you have come home so soon today? Right, it usually takes a while for them to feed all or to water all the flocks. And so he's wondering, hey, how'd you do so quick? They said, an Egyptian. Okay, so this is an interesting thing. So their observation is that Moses was an Egyptian. Okay, likely because he was probably dressed, the way he did his hair, some of the ways he was, maybe even the language he spoke. They kind of figured that Moses was actually an Egyptian and not an Israelite, not a Hebrew. So an Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds and even drew water for us and watered the flocks. He said to his daughters, then where is he? Why have you left the man? Call him that he may eat bread. So he's, one of the things that was important in their culture was hospitality. And so he goes and invokes this hospitality kind of thing of like, hey, the guy helped us out. We need to go get him. Go bring him back so he can eat with us. And Moses was content to dwell with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah, And so obviously they're really compiling some of the story here. So after Moses gets there, he's like, oh man, this is a good place that I could live. Must have worked out some kind of living arrangement here of working for Reuel. And Reuel ends up giving him one of his daughters, Zipporah. And it says, verse 22, she gave birth to a son, and he called his name Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. So part of how the Jewish people, and a lot of cultures in there, would name people, based on some kind of significance in their lives. And we see that a lot, especially in the Bible. And so we just see that. So I've been a sojourner in a foreign land. And so the story continues on. Verse 23. Okay, so that's kind of like how Joseph ends up with his wife, with his kid, kind of some family connections, how he ended up in Midian. And so kind of this recap is he ran for his life essentially from his own land, from the Egyptians, from Pharaoh, because Pharaoh wanted to kill him because Moses stepped in and tried to initiate his own justice. Okay, now this is going to be kind of an irony situation because Moses seems to have felt this call towards justice towards his own people from the very beginning of the story. But he tries to do it his own way, and it doesn't go very well. But we're going to see what happens when Moses partners with God and does it God's way, of how God is the true deliverer and not Moses. So verse 23, it says, during those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. So the king who wanted to kill Moses dies, and the people are really crying out. It says Israel groaned because of their slavery, and they're crying out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. So this is a really interesting thing, as we look at these stories and we're trying to figure out, what these things teach us about God. We usually ask in our Discovery Bible studies, what this teaches about God, what this teaches about humans. And we see it says their cry for rescue and slavery came up to God. And so God is hearing these cries. And remember, there's a pretty big gap where it doesn't seem like maybe God was hearing their cries, because I'm sure they were crying out for quite a while. But in this timing, at this moment, it says God hears the cries of the Israelites, and it makes it up to God. So verse 24 says, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. Okay, so now I don't want us to have this idea that God's up there, floating around, and he's like, oh man, well now I remember the covenant. Okay, God probably remembered it all along. But remember, God's timing and God's working out of things, sometimes we don't quite understand. Sometimes we don't fully get of why he does things certain times for certain ways. But it seems like this is God's time and God's sovereign plan to work out the bringing about of people back to himself, right? The Bible is this story of God who loved his people, who loved his creation, and they went away from him in sin. And God is redeeming these people. He's reconciling them. He's bringing them back. He's making a way for them to be made right with God. And the story unfolds over thousands of years, which is really remarkable how God somehow gives humans free will, right? He allows Pharaoh to do these horrible, wicked, evil things of slavery and killing babies. But in the midst of that, God is raising up people for his purposes. And God uses humans oftentimes in partnership with him to accomplish what he wants. And we're seeing this starting to happen in the person of Moses. Now remember, this story, this was one of these stories. If you're a Hebrew person, if you're a Jewish person, this was one of the main stories of here's what God did for us, so that we can be in right relationship with him. And so it says God remembers his covenant, right? And I think it's more hey, God has got to act on this covenant now, right? I didn't forget about it, but he's remembering okay, man, they're crying out to me. This seems like the right timing. And with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, so that's just the family line. Remember, the story comes after, right? Genesis, after Adam and Eve, and after the flood, after the Tower of Babel. Then we're introduced to Abraham. Then he has a kid, Isaac. There's lots of little stories in between there as well. And then Jacob, who later gets named Israel. And Jacob's the one who had the sons, which become one of them being Joseph. And that's how they landed in the nation of Egypt, and now Moses goes away from Egypt. But we see God is starting to do something, and we're going to see in chapter 3, what is it that he's going to do? Verse 25, it says, God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Right? He sees them, he notices them, and he knows that he's going to act and he's going to do something. He's remembering these things, and he's taking notice for what he's going to do to do this miraculous thing that we're going to continue on the story. And so I just want us to understand, though, the importance of how God interacts in our world. Okay, and sometimes it seems like he's kind of like distant and just letting things happen, and then sometimes we see him act, very, very specifically. And we're seeing these things happen in this story of Moses here. But it's this, the reader's supposed to see, like, okay, God is up to something. God spares Moses. Moses is trying to do stuff on his own. It didn't work out. Then he goes away, but then God still remembers. God is still working out his plan. And sometimes he involves us as humans, and sometimes we're helpful in this. Sometimes we kind of seem like we work against it. But God is working out his plans for the sake of his people. And he hears us, and he listens to us, especially in regards to the things he cares about. And so we can partner with him. We can join in our cries out to him. And that God remembers us. So if you're feeling, man, God doesn't remember me at all. God's forgotten about me. These horrible things have happened to me. I'm going through challenge and difficulty. We can be like the Israelites. Let's cry out to him. God's going to hear us. God's gonna work out and enact these things for us. Okay, it's not always going to work out the way we want it to. There's been many a times where I cried out to God, and God did answer, and it wasn't the answer I wanted. But I've learned over time that I can trust what he does. I can put my faith in him, even if I don't understand it, even if it doesn't seem good at the time. We can put our faith in the God who weaves his will into the plans of humanity.